I would like to acknowledge the Noongar people who are the traditional custodians of the land. I would also like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, of the Noongar nation, and extend that respect to other indigenous Australians who are or may be present here. Thank you. I would like to thank Raymond and Molly, my hosts, Jordan, Sunyi, Chom, and many other friends in Burrendah, Malaysia, Perth, and all of you here for inviting me over and sharing my view on this. I'll start off with what happened in Kuala Lumpur, but I would end it with questions throwing back to you of where should the Malaysian diaspora here go. Next, please. We started off with the 8 demands. I'm sure you remember what it is. The first one was actually to clean up the electoral. The second one is to reform postal ballot. The very reason why many overseas Malaysians rise up to demand change. The third one is to use indelible ink to prevent multiple voting. The fourth is to have a minimum campaign period of 21 days. The fifth, free and fair access to the media. The sixth, to strengthen public institutions from the Election Commission, the police, the judiciary, to all government agencies. The seventh, to stop corruption. The eighth, to stop dirty politics. Now, the relevance of this demand became very apparent after the Sarawak state elections in May, where you found Prime Minister openly buying votes, where you found candidates sending their representative to the longhouses and offer them checks, some of which could not even be honored to buy votes. And you have abuse of state apparatus throughout. And the Election Commission refused to do a single thing. That was the reason why we went to the street. But deeper than that, why so many Malaysians wanted and eventually took it to the street in Malaysia, defying the police roadblock, tear gas, water cannon, police baton, because we want to see a new Malaysia. The cause was and is beyond electoral reform. It's to redefine our public life. Next, please. It's beyond elections. And the 709 rally itself certainly has gone beyond that. One major significance is that the spectre of May 13, the deadly ethnic riot that haunted the psyche of so many Malaysians, was officially buried on that day on the streets of Kuala Lumpur. Now, there have been many attempts in the past to bury it, but there was a time that eventually came to an end. Next. What is important also that people, ordinary Malaysians, experience firsthand police brutality and abuse of other government institutions. These two things were tied together. Because the Malaysian state is authoritarian for a rational reason. Many Malaysians believe that because we are so different, therefore we cannot trust each other. Because we cannot trust each other, we cannot enjoy freedom. We need a government to reign on us, to stop us from killing each other. On that day, these two myths were broken. Because Malaysians realize that despite the differences, we are not enemy to each other. We are not. The only enemy is a state that has forgotten where its powers come from. Next. So, the third significance of that is a rediscovery of the nationhood and fraternity. Why we are who we are. Ordinary Malaysians realize that they share a common destiny before the politics and violence. Those of us who were there, who faced tear gases, most of us cried twice. The first time because of the tear gas, we are just human beings. The second time we cried because we were moved. Malaysians, people you never know perhaps before in your life, would just pass over the salt and water to you. They would help each other just to find a way out. And that transformative experience goes beyond the individual level. At the collective level, I'm sure you have read many reflections and you have watched video clips of what happened on that day. I cried many times after that, because being Malaysian has never been so real. Many Malay Malaysians were surprised to find Chinese Malaysians flooding to the streets of central KL. Chinatown was not part of the plan for Brazil 2, was not part of the plan for the police action. It turned out to be a major spot of where the gathering took place. Different from 2007 when we had Brazil 1, the Brazil 2 rally saw a very mixed crowd. You can't point to them and say, these are past supporters. They were not. Many of them are, many of them were, but many others were not. You do not know who they are, they were just Malaysian. Many Malay Malaysians were touched because in their stereotypes, the Chinese care only about money. They would fight very hard for their rights in economics, in economic development, in cultural autonomy and so on, but they would not die for this country. That day, that myth was proven wrong. And equally on the other side, many Chinese Malaysians were touched because they found Malay Malaysians who they never know in their life, ask them and say, you run first. We cover you because you're a virgin for rallies. You never come out to the street. We know how to handle the police. We'll stay at last. You go first. Now, and of course, the street was not filled with just Malay and Chinese Malaysians and many other people. I picked up the Malay and the Chinese because that's how Malaysian politics has been perceived largely. And the feeling just cut across the board. We talked to people on that day, we were just human beings. Because when you were fired at with tear gas, you just cry. There's no other actions that you can do. I tried to lead a crowd marching towards the police and say, I'll hold them there and I'll talk to the police and see what we can negotiate. We did that singing national anthem. And when they fired the tear gas at me, I tried to hold myself. I couldn't, I just run. They just didn't be. But it's at that kind of juncture you realize that how real the human experience was, and how powerful and how common it is. We are a country. It may not be before, but we are since that day, to me at least. On July 9, two nations were born. One in the middle of Africa, it's called South Sudan. The second is Malaysia 2.0. Next, please. Compared to March 8th, I like to see that and say, I like to look back and say, hey, it was even greater than March 8th. I mean, we look back and say, well, March 8th has usher in all the changes we have seen. But July 9 was, in terms of spirit, was much greater than that. Why? March 8. All those changes happened because many people did not know the changes are coming, were coming. They didn't know that the BN will lose, Selangor will lose Perak, will lose Penang. If you have gone around town and told them and say this would be the outcome, many of them would not come out to vote. Because we'll be caught in the meat, in the spectral, in the nightmare of May 13. That was an accident. March 8 was an accident. But that accident broke the myth that this country cannot be governed without the threat and the deterrence of violence. So on that day, on March 8, people went to cast their ballot, many of them not knowing what's going on. And they would not openly identify themselves and say, this is what I'm doing, because they want to do something to teach the government a lesson without paying a price of being identified. And that's the fear that had reigned in us for more than half a century. But on July 9, it was a different kind of spirit. For nearly a month before that, you have 200 over people getting arrested, ridiculously for wearing yellow, and an extreme case for organizing cleaning up campaign for their local neighborhood. Because we, Malaysia, is the only country in the world where the word clean can be a dirty word, at least to the government. They were terrified when the people want cleanliness. But despite all the intimidation, despite the fact that we have 6 members of the Socialist Party were arrested under the emergency ordinance, which is practically a substitute to the ISA, Internal Security Act. You have about 50,000 people flooded into Central KL. And the story was always so amazing. You read about all those witness accounts. People talking about they looking around in central Chinatown, and in Chinatown or around Masjid Jami or whatsoever area, you couldn't see many people. And people feel demoralized because they thought that the government had succeeded. They had managed to block our friends from coming in. They look around, they were thinking, completely defeated, and then suddenly out of nowhere, you heard people clapping, shouting, birthday, birthday, and out of nowhere, you find hundreds, thousands people marching on the street. Where did these people come from? These were people who have smuggled themselves into the town before 10 a.m. on that morning. Many of them went in the night before. You heard of stories that 10 people squat in a room in a budget inn. You have 20 people squat in office just to wait for that time. Now these other people knew well that you went into KL, you're asking for trouble. The least you'll be blocked by the police, turn away. You probably get tear gas, you probably get water cannon, you probably get beaten up. And they went. Malaysians have never been so brave. We have never been so brave knowing something bad going to happen and we say, hey, we walk out of comfort zone because it's time that this country has to come out of age. That we cannot live in fear. Just before, sorry. You compare with what happened before in 1998, when you have the Reformasi movement, that was not national enough. The non-Malays which make up about 40% of the population did not turn up in full force. Not even the 2007 Brazil one. But on that day, July 9, the streets of KL were one Malaysia. Ironically, a success of Najib campaign. And you go back all the way to 1963 and 1957. I would still say that July 9 has a great significance in our history. Because both 1957 and 1963 were the fruit of elitist negotiation. The masses were not fully involved. They gave the mandate to the parties. The parties strike a deal and convince the British and say, okay, let's have independence. Let us form a new country. But it's never been really something that getting everyone involved. We never really have something comparable to the Indonesians. I'm sure you have many Indonesians who are very gung-ho about the nation. Why? They fought for the nationhood. Their forefathers and mothers fought for the nationhood with blood. Now, I'm not suggesting that, say, we need to go through that. In fact, part of the history were bloody. There was a part that denied by the state. The leftist movement was completely left out. My personal view is that I wouldn't hope that Malaysia actually gone through independence through a much bloody struggle, because many countries that gone through that path did not end well without suffering decades of military intervention politics. The good reason that we didn't go through that. But there's a serious gap in our national experience. We were never a nation. We were never a nation because that we have very different imaginations of how this country should be. Next, please. Next. If you look at the Merdeka legacy, whenever we have any quarrel, what do? We always go back to the Constitution, the Federal Constitution. We always go back to this book. Both sides, but we quote different parts of it. For Perkasa, they would quote Article 3, Islam as the official religion, as the religion of the Federation. They would quote Article 152, that's national language. Article 153, that's special status of the Malays and the natives of the Sabah and Sarawak. And for the non-Muslim or the non-Malays, they would quote Article 10, that's freedom of expression. Article 11, freedom of religion. We never quote the other part, because Constitution was never really part of our life. We conveniently use it to put our claim on the history, so that we can interpret the country's destiny in the way that is favorable to us. We were never a nation, because we were left out from that process. Why? This is not merely because that we had our independence through negotiation, but it's in the years following independence, we never really have popular participation in politics. Now that's the point that I would be the central theme of my speech today. Why we have so few people here? Now that number may not be actually so small. I was told that you have about 20,000 Malaysians in Perth, correct? We are having about, how many percent? 40 over 20,000. That's a small percentage. But the percentage may have already been much larger if you go back to Malaysia, because we have 28 million population, right? And how many people went to the street? 50,000. Of course, you didn't expect that all the 28 million went to the street. But it was a serious case that when many people would not actually take part in their public life. Why? Because that we believe that politics is dirty, politics is dangerous, politics is not for ordinary Malaysians like you and me. If you want to join politics, be a politician, otherwise stay out of politics. We'll never be part of Malaysia because our political participation has never been completed. March 8th, the experience I cited just now, it's a good case. What do? We go and cast our vote, and that's it. How many of us have done more than that? We don't. Because we believe and say ordinary people should get involved in politics by voting, as if that's the highest degree of your patriotism, of your commitment to the country, of what you should do, of your duty. So Malaysia is a legal reality, but not a common emotional reality. It's not real. It was not real, sorry. Thanks. Next, please. So what Birthday 2.0 had accomplished, and I must record my thanks to the Royal Malaysian Police. Without them, we won't be able to do it. What they have accomplished are two things. First, a memory of solidarity and togetherness, which was lacking in the Merdeka legacy. That togetherness was only left with the party elites at the Perikatan, the alliance government. The top leaderships of UMNO and MCA and MIC love each other, but not the people at the bottom. They don't trust each other. They vote for the other party because that's the only way to make sure that their own party is in control. The second thing is the awareness of the decays in our political system. Many Malaysians never ever thought of and say, I will become an activist, and because I'm not an activist, I say something far away from me. So if I become an activist, I get arrested and then I say, so therefore I deserve because I asked for it. And most Malaysians stay out because they believe and say, this won't happen to me. Well, we know that you have fake police out there, robbing people, killing people, raping people. But you will say, hey, what's the chance of me becoming a victim? It's probably not going to be big. So I stay out. What's the chance of me getting tortured and die in police custody? You would assume and say, hey, I'm not an activist. Why would I get this? Why would all these things happen to me? You conveniently ignore the fact that there are non-political activists who suffer and die in police in custody. Many Malaysians conveniently deny all those facts because we believe if we remain apolitical, we are doing good to ourselves and to our family, and that's good enough. That's all we need. We are God-fearing. We are loyal to the country. We don't create trouble. We don't make trouble. July 9, there was a day that ordinary Malaysians went to the street because many of them couldn't stand people like Ibrahim telling them not to go. And they went to the street, all they want was just a fair chance to dictate who should run the country, who should decide how their hard-earned tax money should be used. And what did they get? What did they get? They got beaten up. They got tear gas. They got water cannon. They got arrested. And of course, those who got arrested, for the first time in history, they got treated with nasi biryani. But many Malaysians ask that question. All I ask is just a fair political order. Why should the police treat us like dogs? Now, we're not suggesting that it's actually right for dogs to be abused in Malaysia. right? But many people do feel and say, what's wrong? Why should I pay the salaries of the police and I get beaten up for exercising my right as a citizen? Now that was a core element of how we actually find the sense of togetherness. Look back at Indonesia, look back at the Philippines, or Vietnam, or India. How do you know that you become a nation? You fought against the colonial power. In our case, we never had a chance except for the leftists. Most people stay out of that struggle. On that day, our police force kindly played that role, at least for a short period, as a colonial apparatus. They came down so harmless, and then we realized and said there's something wrong by giving unchecked power to the state. And you realize and say colonization is not the fact that you see, is that we have forced Najib to announce the unintended political transformation program. Remember his GDP? That's government transformation program, which is all about administrative reform. Remember his ETP? That's economic transformation program. It's about how to get the private sector to help the government to do more. But we never actually had political reform. Never had PTP. July 9 forced that into being. The government first announced the Parliamentary Select Committee to study electoral reform, even though they still want to deny the existence of Brazil. Let them be. And on the eve of Malaysia Day, the first time, by chance, we actually celebrate the National Day on the real day. The government announced that ISA would be abolished, the Printing Presses Act would be amended, and a few other legal reforms. And all these things happened because that the government realized and said, no, it's not the old country. You can't go back. You can't pretend that nothing has happened and politics are just as usual. But to what extent are they really going to do it? We have not seen anything concrete so far. The government said they need to come up with 2 substitute acts to replace ISA, which will still allow detention without trial. The government is going to set up a press council. The lifting of the need to annually renew publication permit for newspaper merely just take away the trouble that you have to do so every year. But the minister remains his full control to revoke any publication permit, and that still cannot be challenged in court. Now, even when we come back to electoral reform, where all these things started, we have the PSC, but at the same time, you have heard of the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, and everyone else talking about snap polls. Now, if elections were to be called before the PSC can complete its work and can have its recommendations implemented, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. But at least we are pushing that into the right directions. Next, please. So, what new Malaysia I'm talking about? I think the achievement that we can count is number 1, the politics of violence is permanently ended. Now that's very important because if you look back, what happened after March 8? I always jokingly say I live next to Selangor, just at the border of Kuala Lumpur to Selangor. I always jokingly say, well, a week after March 8, how come there's no riot? How come there's no military rule, martial law in Selangor? Because the government has been overthrown. There should be some social unrest and so on. Those things didn't happen. So after March 8, the myth that this country cannot have changed the government because otherwise it trigger ethnic riots and so on was collapsing. But they didn't stop trying. Do you remember Cowhate? That happened on the eve of National Day in 2009. Do you remember Allah, the church arson? And well, vandalism at mosques as well. And all those things happened a while after that. It was at the end, it was the beginning of 2011. Sorry, beginning of 2010. Beginning of 2010. Then all those things were actually attempts to resurrect the specters of May 13. They wanted to force us to say, because we are so different, we therefore cannot actually have full-fledged democracy. When you have freedom, you're asking for trouble. Remember how the Home Minister responded to the Cowhate protest? He came out to justify for the thugs, because he said it was the state governments that actually offended them. And eventually, when he was forced, when the government was forced to prosecute the Cowhate thugs, what did they use? They did not use criminal intimidation. Whereas what really these people were doing. They brought the Cowhate, wasn't so much merely just to insult the Hindu. If they have done those things by tearing pictures of Cowhate or whatsoever. The reason they did that was actually to threaten violence. They're using the Cowhate example to tell the Hindu and the state government and say, this could be you. Now that's criminal intimidation. The government refused to charge them on that. What did they do? Instead, they charged them for sedition, for hurting the sensitivities of the Hindu. They charged them for illegal assembly. The whole idea was that the government wanted to tell us the real problem of Malaysian politics is because we have too much freedom. Not because violence can enjoy impunity. And that's exactly what happened. They tried to do again before July 9. You have first Perkasa. You have Ibrahim Ali, who declared himself as a war general, who told part of the citizen and said, you better stay back home and stock up your food because anything can happen. You have UMNO, who came out and said, no, we are patriots, we are not going to do anything, but we will have this counter rally if Bersih is going to go on, and therefore Bersih should cancel it if you do not want to see us going to the street. Well, they were much milder than UMNO 23 years ago because that you have an UMNO chief who had apparently education from Oxford University. And then you have the Silat group who came out and said, we'll be the third line of defense after the military and the police. Now, all those were very brutal, very direct threat of violence. Did the government do anything? No. You have the threat of private violence. You have the exercise of state violence before and on that day. It was what Malaysia 1.0 was all about. We live peacefully because we know we have to tolerate each other. When you have a strong government. It was an old way, it's the old Malaysian state coming, trying to reassert its reason of existence. That you need us. You need a strong government to run on you, so then you can behave properly. The Malaysians defied. We went in the street. We did not care about the threat of private violence. And on that day, you found Malaysians of different ethnic groups helping each other. And the UMNO youth patriots ended up having their members from their Bangladesh branch Because they can't even find enough Malaysians to be there. And the state credibility and legitimacy were at its lowest point, because people realize and say, that's not the government that I want to pay my tax for. So we're there. And the politics of violence. The best example of this is that just last Saturday, you have the Himpun. It started off and said this is a warning to the Christian not to convert Muslim. Then later, because of protests, they say no, we are not against Christian. We're just telling and say we need to unite. Now you look back in history, it's basically the same script. Don't touch us, because otherwise we get angry. If we get angry, we cannot be controlled, we cannot be responsible of our behavior. But they have to change even the discourse. They have to change even the discourse. When someone tries to stir it, the organizer has to stop it. And instead of getting 1 million, they get 5,000. Art Harun, the lawyer, asked a question and said, what happened to the 950,000? Were they stopped by some Christian missionary to convert them into into Christians on the way? But what you see is that part of politics is no longer working. That's part of the new Malaysia. But can we go beyond that? The second question is that is it the end of ethno-religious politics? I don't think so. You still have questions on the identity, on the identity aspect, that from hudud to apostasy. You have questions on interest, economic interest, that whether we should maintain Bumitraism or nativism, or we should have a need-based affirmative actions of welfare state, or a meritocracy. Now those are questions we still haunt us. It's not going to go away. It's very important for us to realize and say democracy is not a bed of roses. I'm not married, but I think that from my observation, democracy is like marriage. You're going to have a lot of quarrels, you're going to have a lot of troubles, but you're stuck together because it's still better than other things sometimes. Am I right? I'm not sure. But my point is that we need to have a very realistic view of politics. Whatever I talk about, a new Malaysia is not going to be heaven on earth because we are not angels. That's the real reason. It's not because we have a bad government. So we still fight all those things. That will continue. So, is the new Malaysia talk about an emergent multi-party democracy? People talk about that we want to have a two-party system and so on. I have a long piece saying that why this is not possible. Because you actually need to change the political system. You need to devolve the power from the federal government to the state governments to the local authorities so that different parties may capture government at different levels. And therefore you can't have a one-party state. And until that structure is changed, what you're likely going to have is the one-party predominance. Just a better one or a worse one. That's roughly the choice you have. So there's a lot of things that are going to happen over there. But really, the issue that what drove many people to the street on July 9 in KL and worldwide was that resentment to the government. Now I can probably get you very excited if I just slam the government all the way. But I won't be telling you the truth as a political scientist. This country won't change by just changing the government. Our country would change only if we change ourselves. Politicians are men best friends and women best friends too. What does that mean? If you do not know how to house train politicians, you get beaten by the politician, you have yourself to blame. And what we are suffering today, if you like, is a collective karma of what we have been doing for the past half a century. Because we refuse to acknowledge differences, we refuse to celebrate diversity at a very fundamental and the deepest level. We don't do that. We merely tolerate What does it mean by tolerance? Tolerance means that I don't actually like you, but it takes too much trouble for me to beat you up and not to get myself in trouble. Right? Celebrating diversity means that I'm happy to be Chinese on Monday and Tuesday to be Indian and Kazakh on Wednesday and Thursday to be Malay whatsoever. I like to try different kind of lifestyle. I want to have different identity. Or maybe I don't. But I don't feel threatened when someone is different from me. I don't feel threatened that I walk into a place where people are so different. As if you walk into the supermarket, you have all kinds of goods, you don't feel threatened. But that's something so hard. Why? Because part of the reason is that we look back to countries like England, and it's not even England, probably it's actually France. We look at those countries and say those are nation states. If you have democracy, they have to be monoculture, they have to be homogeneous. So we're paying a price and say, unless you're happy to do away all these differences, otherwise you don't deserve democracy, you don't deserve freedom. Because freedom wouldn't work well with diversity. Now that's not too much different from Australia, except that you have a much more different ethnic compositions in terms of number, in terms of the ratio. But otherwise, a lot of issues are the same. Now democracy can work in a very messy situations like India. Can you tell me a standard Indian image? They're not necessarily even dark skin. Many Malaysians think of Indian as just thinking of South Indians. They're not. You have the Dravidians, you have the Aryan, the Indo-European, you have Sino-Tibetans in the northeast. You almost have every major faith in India. They have, I think, about 16, including English and Hindi, they have 16 official languages. And that number may be rising because you have new state coming out every other few years based on linguistic territory. It's very messy. We normally don't look at India and say that's a successful example because they're poor. It's just like many Malaysians will not be able to look at Indonesia and say, hey, they're actually politically more advanced than us. Why? Because Indonesia sent their mates to work in Malaysia. Right? We look at how much money they have and we look at them and say, hey, you're a success. But these are the countries that actually work much better than us. Because they are multipolar, if you like, meaning that you don't have a single... the idea that the country should be homogeneous is to assume that it's actually unipolar. You don't have so many... it's an assimilationist model, that everyone gets assimilated so you become a unipolar. There's a single curve. Now that sometimes works. A good example is Kelantan. Now those of you who are from Malaysia or who have been to Malaysia, you roughly know that you can't find pork openly sold in supermarket in the West Coast because they normally get hidden somewhere. You need to look for it. They probably need to have a directory to find out where you can find pork and so on. Because why? According to some people, if you sell it openly, that would be an offense to the Muslim majority. Now go to Kelantan, go to a place called Tumpat in the northeast where you actually have the largest sleeping Buddha. At least you're likely going to have the same experience like I did. I took a taxi with two Chinese friends. Halfway we asked the taxi driver to stop and say, there's a dog-sized animal running around, we want to take photo. And that guy, Malay taxi driver, looked at us and said, so what, it's just a pig? It's just a pig. So what? He looked at us and say, hey, have you just come out from some rural area you've never seen the world? And I told him, I said, well, because this is Kelantan, you have that a pig roaming around in a Malay kampung in West Coast, people will come out with parang. You're going to have an ethnic riot. Why? Because what you have in West Coast Peninsula is a bipolar society. A bipolar society makes us very anxious, very worried, very tense, because the stake is high. Either I'm the winner or the loser. And that's actually been what has been troubling us. because everyone else is actually dragged into that line. So you have to think out of the West Coast. It's not even KL-centric. Now if you go to Sabah and Sarawak, Sabah is now increasingly becoming like West Coast because I'm not trying to turn it into from a multipolar society into a bipolar society divided by Muslim, non-Muslim. But Sarawak at least remains a multipolar society. Now there's a problem with that. When you don't have sharp social cleavages, sometimes you can't have effective politics. So in Sarawak you can easily buy votes because people don't actually engage in politics the way that we do. But on the other hand, people don't get easily annoyed. They're very relaxed because there's nothing much to fight. Now what happened in West Coast is that you have a single prize in political competitions. You win the federal government, you have enough resources to control the state, and the state will control the local government. Now, then becomes a question, who controls the state? Is that Malay? Chinese? You start getting very excited. Now when you're so excited, you can't remain calm. You just have to think about if you're going to walk in, what's the name of the casino here? Huh? Bestwood Casino. You walk in and you say, I'm going to put everything I have on the table and try to remain calm. Whether you win or lose, I doubt you can. You can't because the stake is too big, right? But if I tell you and say now, split whatever you have into 100 portions and go in everyday play with one portion, would you be much more rational? You would. You probably would enjoy gambling. I'm not advocating for that. But I just want to tell you and say what's wrong with Malaysian politics is because we get stuck in the old form. We get stuck because we started off, we get dominated by the bipolar society in the West Coast. And the political system reinforced that fear. Everyone worried that, say, will someone else take over and reign on us? So we get very excited. And therefore, we start thinking in like, if I get challenged, I'll take a bump. And therefore, because we worry about that, we need a strong government. And then a strong government tells us and say, no, I'm so strong, you better join us. If you join us, you get excluded. So when everyone joins the government, so it looks like it provides stability, but when everyone joins the government, how do you actually compete? Politicians need to look for a job. They need to get someone out. One of the ways is pray hard so someone dies, you have a new competition, you have a vacancy, you run. But even then you need to ask yourself and say, how do I compete with other politicians? So you look for a reason to compete. Now this is no difference from business. Think of it. What's the difference from your economic market? You go in, you compete. You know, would Pepsi Cola and Coca-Cola tell you and say, the reason why we are different because we are after your money? They wouldn't be so honest, right? They will tell you and say because it represents different tastes, different imagination, different feeling. That's the reason why we have all different kinds of smartphones. Otherwise, why don't we just get, you know, a company to produce all the smartphones that look alike, and then, you know, by minimizing differentiation, product differentiation, you could actually save the cost. You bring down your cost curve, right? Those who study economics will know what I'm talking about. Why do we do that? Because business want to make the best out of it. It's all about competition. Now we understand those things so well. The question I want to bring back to you is that, why can't we understand politics? Why can't we understand politics? It's just another aspect of human life. You're not better in politics. Politicians go into politics not because they're saints, they're not. Not because they're angels, most of them are not. But neither they are much worse. What we are capable of doing for good, for the better or worse, we are capable of doing it in other fields. You don't backstab people only in politics, you do that in business, you do that by undermining your competitors for your love interest. Don't you? We all do the same thing. So why should we actually stay out of politics? So someone was talking about, let's say, well, you know, I have friends who want to come then, but they call their parents say not to come because Huat is a troublemaker. You don't want to get, you know, get affected by his crazy thoughts and get yourself in trouble. And I think that that's where we need to change. Redefine ourselves more than just like say, you know, we shouldn't be the nation that live in fear. And people ask me and say, why do you do all these things? I say that the main motivation for me is because that I hate to live in fear. I'm the youngest son. That was a bit unfortunate for my father because I tried to hold him accountable and justify every action he said. Don't get a son like me. But growing up in that way, I just can't accept to say, don't do things because that you get punished, and without any justification. I'm third generation Malaysians. My grandparents came to Malaysia to fight for a living. My parent generation did their very best to fight for a living. I do not have any children yet, not married, and don't have anyone outside marriage. But I can't imagine myself one day if I were to have, or if I were to tell my nephews and nieces, they say, what we are doing, what I'm doing, what I have done is to give better living to you. Because that's my parent generations. That's their task. Society needs to evolve. There's nothing wrong to stop us from going further. So the only thing that I can give to my generation, or myself at least, and I'm going to impose it on others, is that we need to fight for dignity, quality of life, human rights. And I can't look around and say, I'm just going to repeat what my parents did. They did a fantastic job. But they didn't have that much of resources to push the boundary. I have. And I can't run away. Now I respect you people because you have every reason not to be here. Some of you were students. You can use the excuse and say you have exam to attend to, so don't come here. Some of you decided to settle here. You have every reason and say what happened in Malaysia doesn't concern me. Because whatever happened there is there. Nothing to do with me. But you're still here. Because you're probably like me. You know well that we are tied to this country. There's something that won't be able to change. Where we come from, who we are. Next, please. What I want to conclude with my speech today is to invite you to think, what's the link between you as a member of the diaspora, Malaysian diaspora here, and the new nation that may emerge? As I said, it has been born. The question whether the new nation can actually survive is a big question. How will it grow is another big question. So what I want to invite you to look at is that it's time for us to rethink about nation state. Now I'm not going into the philosophical debates of what's the form of nation state. This is not meant to be an academic lecture. I'm not studying international relationship. But I want to draw you the attention is that in the age of globalization, it's quite silly to think that we are all like the past, and we are tied down to our land. We travel all the time. You invest beyond the national boundary. You probably have a few boyfriends and girlfriends, in different continents and so on. Right? And so how do you actually define and say, well, you have to be Malaysia to be Malaysian? No, you don't. Now, I don't have a problem with even dual citizenship and so on. I think those things need to be re-examined at some point, but that's not what I'm going into. But what I want to look at is to say that there's a decreased relevance of residency and geography in defining what nation state is. Because we are moving all around. And on that, I would say the diaspora, you can split that into two groups. One is temporary, people who come and go, students, workers, expats, people who don't intend to stay back, but just because there's a better offer here whatsoever, you come and go. So part of the diaspora community will not be permanent, it will be replaced. But the other part could be permanent. Now that includes Malaysians who would just opt to be PR of another country, of the host country. That could include former Malaysians. That could also include potential Malaysians. People who want to be Malaysians or Malaysia will decide to say, I want to be Malaysian one day. Right? But Ryan, for example, and Melanie, of course. So how do we actually move from here? And the two questions I want to throw it to you, because I don't have the answer. I'm not a diaspora. I'm here not just because that tomorrow I hope to see all of you to be there in Forest Place. Not just that, but I hope that I have the privilege to be engaged in a meaningful discussion on where the Malaysian diaspora in Perth will move on to. The two questions you need to answer, or you need to reflect on. One is, what can your Australian experience contribute to the transformation of Malaysia? Now, the Malaysian community here is not exactly a microcosm of Malaysia there because of different compositions of class and ethnic structure. It's not representative. But nevertheless, you would have some similarity. The major difference would be that you are living in a liberal democratic environment. A lot of things that would not be able to happen back home because all the restrictions, you can actually test it out here. So what are you doing in enriching the country back home and maximizing your experience here? I was at one point, if you like, the way I define it, a member of the Malaysian diaspora in the UK for 4 years. I've gone through my part. I don't know what about you. Now the second question would be more important than say, what can your Malaysian connection contribute to the enrichment of Australia? Because we are not talking about exclusive nationalism here and say, the rise up Malaysians, this is an evil country, one day we go back and so on. No. I don't think that's actually work for the future, or even the present. Right? We're talking about how would the diaspora here position yourself so that you make the best out of your condition for both Malaysia and Australia. The second question is particularly important if you're going to stay back. Because if we cannot define who we are, we cannot define where we want to be, in 10 years' time, you may remain as a member of Malaysian diaspora, your second generation may not be. They may be just absorbed in the sea of mainstream Australia. Or they may actually turn around and say, well, I want to join the Chinese diaspora because that would be number 2 world power. Or I want to join the Indian diaspora because that's number 2 Asian power. I want to join the Muslim diaspora because we all suffer. Whatsoever reason. So it's really a question that you have to ask and say where you as a community would go. And it's not me, someone back home come here and to have any answer to that. I'm here to learn. I'm here to learn because I believe that if you want to redefine the country, everyone has to do his or her part. And it's particularly important for the diaspora to do so. There's something very moving about the Global Birthday 2.0. What is that? It's the fact that majority of the members of Malaysian diaspora left the country because of some form of rejection, a perceived rejection by the state. Many people left not because that you don't have economic opportunity at home, but you felt that you were not treated fairly. So there was enough reason for people to shut up, to shut down their connection whatsoever thing, and keep quiet and say, why should I care? But there were enough people who care. There were enough people who can tell the government does not equal the nation. Where do you go from there? I hope to listen from you. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Wong? Huat, if you'd like to be called, raise your hands if you like, you can come up to the mic or ask it from there. He's come all the way from Malaysia. Melanie.
I have one
it would have some effect on marginal seats, because by bringing a few hundreds of, thousand or a few hundred, probably would tip the balance off. But there's a lot of uncertainty in a few ways. Now, how many unregistered voters would be registered in time? In Bursa, we are pushing for automatic voter registration. And that's actually very simple. All you need is just synchronization of database. If you know you have a smartphone, you know how the smartphone works, right? Now, all we need to ask is that it's easy to be as smart as a smartphone. If you pay about Malaysian ringgit about 1,000 to 2,000, you get a good smartphone. And we are paying the government for 200 billion. Why can't we get a smart easy so that we can decide who runs the country? Because if you can actually introduce that, there will be 3.7 million people be enfranchised immediately. Even if just 1/3 of them cast their vote in the elections, there will be 1 million. You divide that by 222 constituency, you're talking about nearly 5,000 in every constituency. They wouldn't be able to fill up 5,000 Bangladeshi anywhere. So we are doing our very best to check on them. I believe the political parties are doing the same. But what we can do here is to make sure real Malaysians sign up and turn out. Because even in the last election, you're talking about a turnout rate of less than 80%, about 78%. And you're talking about 2-3 million people who did not go out to vote. All you need is these people who turn out and cast their vote. It doesn't matter who are you voting. If you're not happy with all the population, go and cast a spoiled vote. The idea is that you need to let the politician know and say you care. You staying back at home is basically telling them, take advantage of me because I'm dumb. I only want to pay tax. You can do whatever things on me because I'm scared. I'm as timid as a mouse. I think we need to change that. It's really where we can actually go forward. While we're pushing for all these things, what we need is that ordinary citizens stand up and say, I'm not going to be part of the stupid silent majority. Now, let me rephrase it. I don't think that all the silent majority is stupid, but you're not going to be the stupid part of the silent majority who will not even turn out to vote. Now, what happened in last election was many people would buy air ticket to go back and vote. They did so because many of them wanted to teach the government a lesson. That's emotional. Nothing wrong. But the question now is that would you be rational enough to do the same thing? Because all you need to make sure the next election can be rigged is to get enough people who say, I don't care. That's all you need to do. It's not the Bangladeshis that are going to make a difference. It's Malaysians who stay back at home that are going to make a difference. If you quote Adam Burke, you say that all you need for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. That's
Any other questions? I was in Kuantan recently.
Yeah.
And there's a thing in Kuantan where the people who are opposing Linus tend more to come from the Chinese community than the Malay community.
Right.
And I had an interview with the Chief Minister of Perth. And he said to me that the reason why the Chinese community in Kuantan were opposing Linus was to help China. Because China actually had in the world, China
Right.
has the biggest part of its rare earth industry.
Right.
So his theory to me was the Chinese in Kuantan opposed Linus to help China.
Okay.
So I was wondering if you could comment on
Sure.
what sort of political...
Right. Now, 100 years ago, you find many Chinese in Malaya very gung-ho supporting Chinese revolution in China. But today, I don't think you can even find many altruistic Chinese in China, let alone that Chinese in Malaysia feeling, so strongly attached to China. If you can find any, let me know. Yeah, most Chinese I know that's very calculated. They will start thinking about themselves before others, which is nothing wrong. Most modern economy work in that way. The real reason that why in Linus, in Kuantan, that the main oppositions come from the Chinese community is because they have greater access to information. And I would say the one who really get killed, other than, okay, let's look at Linus, look at Kuantan and say who would actually get killed, you know, suffer from having a rare plant. It would be, first of all, the tourism industry. You have a Club Med in Kuantan. Now, when you have the Linus plan, if I invite you and say, let's go to Kuantan and enjoy, you know, sun and also a bit of radiative, would you go? You wouldn't. So you kill that off first. Now, if tourists wouldn't stay, would you stay and retire so that you die a few years earlier? You wouldn't. So you start selling your houses, right? So the housing market will collapse. Now what next? Kuantan is famous for salted fish. Next to Kuantan is a town called Kemaman, which is famous for kelopo reko, some kind of Malay delicacy. Now, if you're going to have Linus plant there, if anyone want to give you Kuantan salted fish or kelopo reko from Kemaman, would you accept it and say, hey, this is a nice gesture, you love me so much? Or you think that the guys actually want me to die earlier? You're going to kill everyone. But the reason is that they cannot get out of that because that they cannot get the information. We should actually make a good job because you speak Malay, and it's kind of forced them to think and say, hey, Mas Saleh can speak Malay, and Mas Saleh was actually opposing this. What's wrong with me? What we need is actually to get Malaysians to start thinking. A lot of times it's just come out from the comfort zone. We need to subvert a lot of conventional wisdom. Because it's this conventional wisdom that get us into this trouble. You do the same, don't expect a different outcome. Only mad people think that way. By doing the same and you can get a different outcome. Yes, Cindy?
I think we are very clear for 20 million
Mm. Yeah.
So, what do you think is the message to people?
I think what we need to do is to send a message to the Prime Minister and the Electoral government saying we need you to send an election observation team. As simple as that, if the Prime Minister is confident that the election will be clean, if he dares to be clean, invite people to witness it. That's all what we need to do. And you can do that very easily. Tomorrow, make sure you go there. And we'll start off with singing national anthem loudly, because we tell the world and say we love Malaysia, we are not here to smear the name of Malaysia, but rather because we're so proud to be Malaysian that we cannot tolerate Malaysia to be dirty. It's a very, very simple thing. You can be there, and there's no reason that I understand that the people who worry about say, you know, I'll get monitored, I'll get police, probably I'll lose my citizenship and so on. No. You don't lose your citizenship at all if you're born in Malaysia. Or more precisely, as long as you're not a naturalized citizen, no one can revoke your citizenship. Unless you give it up by, say, taking part in political elections in other countries. If you have voted in Australian election, for whatever reason, you can be deprived of your citizenship. But that's not because that, you know, you go against the government. In any way, they can do that the same. And what can they do? I mean, if you hold a scholarship, government scholarship, and say, I wouldn't want to go to the front, I can understand. But you can go around that area, wave a small flag by the roadside. If they accuse you, say, no, I'm just being patriotic. No, I don't expect everyone to become martyr and go out and, you know, pay whatever price that you have to. No, you don't have to. I mean, a lot of things is that the reason why the country is stuck in the situation we are in is not because you have too few people going to the front. It's you have too few people doing things at the back. Malaysians have, or the people who stay back have two problems. One, they tend to overestimate themselves. They like to imagine that ISA detention order will be served to them. No, I would tell you, not even because that the Prime Minister say now he wants he wants to abolish it. But even in the past, if at the ISA going to stay, there would be probably a list of 200 people before coming to you. There probably would be a list of 200 people. And do you think that you're so important that you get to the top? I'm not sure, right? I'm not sure whether I'll get in the top 10, right? Or top 20, or top 100 for that matter. And I'm in front. So why should you think that you're so important? Okay? Until Amiga I get in, then you can start worrying and say, hey, but I get in, right? By attending this, no, you don't. Second thing is Malaysians who stay at the back, who do nothing, underestimate their power. In an authoritarian society, or even a democratic society to some extent, nobody speaks louder than somebody. Why? It's just a question of inference. Now, imagine this Wong Huat make a call to the Malaysian embassy and say, blah, 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 I want to complain. So they will say, who are you? Huat. Okay, Huat, oh, I know you're a troublemaker, right? So, how many people out there are like me? How many? You can count your fingers, right? Academics, troublemaker, crazy. It's probably only a few. So you say, okay, I can dismiss Wong Huat because you are somebody, but there's only a few of you. I just need to take you in under IC and that probably solve the problem. Now, you call the embassy and say, I want to, you call the High Court or the consulate and say, I want to make this complaint. Or you go back and call the police station and say, I want to make this complaint. They ask, who are you? Ahmad Sabri Tan, whatsoever, or, lecture me. And they look around and say, hey, how come it doesn't appear in the first 200, 2,000, 20,000, and still can't find a name? Now imagine that you have 10 people who call them in that way. Within the next 1 hour, something bad happened. Let's say they arrest someone among you. Okay, they harass someone among you. And between the next hours, you have 10 calls coming in. What would they think? They will start asking and say, who are behind these 10 people? How of everyone who make a call, how many have not made a call? See the difference? You make a difference because simply they can't name you, therefore you are powerful. Remember V for Vendetta? Just that. So you're much more powerful than you are, you're less dangerous, less risky, you're in a less risky situation than you imagine. You can do everything. It's much harder for me to do something. Because they can tell what I'm going to do, right? There will be people who actually take notes of what I do. They're probably looking at my Facebook every day. If they're smart, they would be able to do some data mining and figure out and say, okay, this guy would think of some crazy idea on Tuesday morning at about 9 a.m. They can think of all kinds of things to respond to you. So there's a set format if you really want. Or at least I think I can do that if I'm the government. Okay? But if you're just an ordinary Malaysian, it's hard for them to do that. And that's where you can actually create that pressure on them. All you need to do is just get 10 people and say, everyone make a call. Within 10 minutes, that's it. You know what else you can do? Use fax. Fax is the best way to protest. Why? It will jam up the machine on the other end. Don't do email, because email you can immediately put it in spam, and that's gone, right? Jam up the machine, what I can do is I have to change the fax number. Every time I get a new fax number, jam it up. Ordinary people are powerful. It's just that you haven't used that. But the reason why we don't use it is because we get stuck in the old political culture thinking that caring about politics, getting involved in politics is stupid, is dangerous, is irresponsible. We must change this. If we want this country to be better for our own good, we must change that. We must get involved in politics. We must change the idea and say, to the extent of what? To the extent that if someone comes to see you and say, I want to court your daughter, I want to propose to your daughter and so on, you ask and say, hey, have you registered as voter? Yeah, if you didn't even care about what happened in this country, can I trust you? What would happen if my daughter married you, and then you cannot even take care of the children's future? then I would, as grandparents, I would have to take care of them. Right, it's a cost. You need to change all the things, you need to use market force. So I don't believe in asking people and say, go out and sacrifice. No, it won't work. I didn't sacrifice. Do you see me really making any sacrifice? No. I always threaten the police. I scolded them, if you can find it on Facebook, sorry, on YouTube. I threatened them when I was arrested the first time for 3 hours, second time for 3 days. Almost at the end of the 3 days, I say, tell your boss it's not going to work. I find a way to survive in lockup. You can try me with longer period, 3 weeks. That's been ISA. But just be careful. If I survive that, I'll join politics. I'll probably become your boss. You just have to be nasty. The world is not as dangerous as we imagine. It is dangerous because all of us don't care. Just think of it. When did they start sending out postal ballots? 4 days before elections. How long does it take from a ballot to fly from Malaysia to reach to Perth? You get it? And then how do you get it back? You take a flight back? No, you can't because it's postal ballot. You can't even do a personal delivery. A state director of SPR told me that he has overseen state elections in Kedah in 1999, Penang in 2004, Kelantan in 2008. He has never seen a single ballot from overseas counted. How can we change this? Tomorrow, you need to make sure your voice is heard. If you don't go out and protest, no one will hear you. It's your world. You may want to settle here, but wouldn't you want to have a second home back home? Right? Even you want to have your first home here, it's still always good to have a second home back home. Why should you be denied that right? You really have to think about that where you want to go. I really hope that the reason that why I talked to the organizer is say, my talk would not be just something of getting you go out there and, catch some media attention and then go home, because it's not meant to be just 10 minutes. I hope to see here a sign of change. The Global 2.0 was wonderful, but where do we go from here? We need something greater. We need the Malaysian diaspora speaking out and say, I want to define my position here in Australia and at home. And Brazil, of course, will be part of the core of your agenda, but it won't be an entirety. You need to ask and say where you want to be, because you continue to live here in Australia, you need to contribute here. There's a lot of things you can do. You can save Kuantan and not just relying on Ryan, who speaks Malay.
Thank you, Huat. That was a very insightful and rousing presentation. Can we all rise and give Huat a good standing ovation? Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for taking time off and coming here. At least it shows you still maintain the Malaysian spirit. I suppose at the end of the day, you can take Malaysian out of Malaysia, but you can't take Malaysia out of the Malaysian. Thanks again very much, and good night. Would anybody like to take a photograph of Huat, or maybe we can take a group photograph? Just come forward, and then we'll have one group photograph taken. It might appear